Hello, everybody. Welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
And my name is James.
It's People's Poll Day, James.
It
Today is
is.
the day where we discuss a topic of your choosing. We put a few options out every Sunday. We let the people decide which one we should talk about. Sometimes they pick good ones, sometimes they don't. Today they picked an all right one, an interesting one that we can have a little debate about. So tell me, James, what were the options this week and what did people choose?
Oh, I can't remember now. No, I can. We put in about Phil Neville's reign as England women's manager. It's not something we've really touched on much, women's football. So I thought it might be, it's kind of coming around that he's basically going to stay in the job for another year and then leave, which seems a bit bizarre to me. Just get someone else in if he's not going to do the tournaments and that. They've obviously had a really bad year, but I wondered if there was any legacy left on the fact that obviously a high-profile male footballer had taken over the women's football team. And points last summer, England were amongst the favourites to try and go and win it, ultimately losing to the United States in the semi-final. We also put in about the financial, let's say, irregularities. Something's going down in Greece with Olympiacos. It looks like they might get thrown out of the main league. That one's going to go back into the poll next week. Essentially, it's match fixing and the like. You suggested to me yesterday that there's very dark web of stuff going on in Greece. So I think we may end up coming back to that this time next week. And also put in the idea of looking at stadium expansions within the Premier League and possibly lower, like what clubs are capable of doing it, who's looking to do it, is what's happening currently, curtailing everything from that perspective. The winner of the vote is one at third time lucky, a suggestion from our Arsenal correspondent, Adam at 350, to suggest which 20 teams would make up a European Super League. I have to say at this point, before we cover this, I can't think of anything worse than this happening.
We do not want this to happen.
I can't think of anything worse.
No.
It's
horrible.
It's something that's been bashed about for 20 plus odd years. You can go back and look through timeline, looking through articles that, Wenger was suggesting 18 years ago that it would happen within 10 years. Clarence Seedorf suggested similar about 10 years ago. He's like, it's coming. It's an eventuality that we will get to. And it's something that's reared its head quite ugly again in the last couple of years and also in the last couple of weeks. However, it doesn't feel at this moment any closer to what it would have been, say, 10 years ago. There are, I think, certain clubs within certain football associations who are pushing for it. It seems that ours, fortunately, is not one of them. So it's believed at the moment there is major resistance from Premier League clubs to this idea. And also, as you would expect, through a lot of the fan ownership, German clubs are not on board either. Yeah. And unless English and German clubs were to get on board with the idea, I can't really see it taking off. Because then essentially you're talking about Barca, Madrid, PSG and Italian clubs.
Let's be honest, the Premier League is by far and away the biggest attraction in the world football from a financial point of view, marketing point of view. So no English clubs, this is never going to happen. I don't think they could do it without English clubs.
I think they could, but it wouldn't therefore be what they want it to be.
No.
Part of the idea of why some clubs want it, and we'll talk about individual cases a bit more as we do this, is some want the security of the constant money. Feel like
there'd be no relegation or promotion.
Yeah, feel like a divine right on historical European performance that they should make part of a European Super League, and it should be a closed shop to new clubs finding success. So a Newcastle United, for example, now would, should they do really well in the next 10 years, it would be closed shop for them. Unless some sort of promotion was, it's just a horrible conversation to even talk about, but it's based on greed is what it's based on. And I think the one reason the English clubs are not so bothered about it right now is because you only have to look at that Deloitte money list, mate. Like, the English clubs are killing it financially.
There are certain sports that do operate in that way, where there is a closed shop. There's no more new teams being issued or what have you. Let's give an example of basketball in America, right? The number of franchises, as they call them, that are out there is set, and that's the number of franchises that are going to be out there. But then they have some things in that system that are so alien and different to what we do, such as then college basketball and the draft system. So if you had a closed shop of 20 teams, you would want there to be some mechanism that allows the team that are bottom to at some point catch up with the teams that are at the top. Otherwise, I think what you'd find is that that league would become so repetitive year in, year out, unless one of those clubs got a massive cash injection, if the transfer market worked in the same way. But I think if you then flipped it on its head and introduced a draft system where any new players joining those squads of 25 was done on a draft basis where the lowest team got to pick the best players and so on, suddenly it becomes very different. But now you've taken away not only the clubs from their leagues, you've broken the transfer system as well to try and create some level of competitiveness. So there's a million reasons why this is just nonsense, to be honest with you. But
I want to read you a quote from Juventus president, Andrea Agnelli. And this quote is only about a month old. And it's in reference to Atalanta, who have performed very well in their first Champions League season. Have obviously upset quite a few people in Italy because they're quite a small club, really, in comparison to some of, say, the Milan, Turin, Rome giants and that. And not only have they got in, but they've done it by playing really attacking football. I think even in this season in Serie A, I think they've scored 10 more goals than any other side. Okay. They're one of the best teams in Europe, actually, to watch at the moment. But he said this about them around about the time they played Valencia in the last 16. He said, I have great respect for everything that Atalanta are doing, but with our international history and thanks to just one great season, they had direct access into the primary European club competition. Is that right or not?
Merit, mate. I hate history. I don't think there's anything to be learnt from the history of a football club. Nothing.
At the end of the day,
nothing.
Serie A, Bundesliga, Premier League and Premier League, they get top 4 spots, go straight in the Champions League. Atalanta finished in those top 4 spots.
Yeah.
And may well do again this season, by the way, when it finishes.
How good is the past as a predictor of the future? It's okay, but for short periods of time. But the longer you look at it, like you can't use the last 20 years of Manchester United's history to predict the next 20 years because the last 5 have been completely different to the previous 15. So the smaller you get the time brackets, the more useful the past is as a predictor of the future. But other than that, and what? Like look at Newcastle as a classic example now. And what? Doesn't matter.
Well, even just look at Liverpool now. If you'd have said to a Liverpool fan in 1990, it's going to be 30 years, they would have thought some sort of Armageddon had happened to their football club.
Yep.
Like, there's no way that a Liverpool would have gone 30 years without winning the league. United from, 67 to 93. United now, if you'd have said in 2013, right, United won't win any of the next 7 Premier Leagues. Nobody probably would have believed you. You might say, okay,
no.
Period under David Moyes, but they'll recover. And they're still quite a distance off, really.
Liverpool have managed to sneak in a couple of European Cups in that time, or Champions League as it's now, which is no small achievement, but still, 30 years without a league is
a lot of these clubs, and I think you can even take in the example with Newcastle at the moment, where there's a few of the clubs getting a bit scared about the power they might have, right? Seeing what Man City and Chelsea have done previously over the last 20 years and thinking, nah, don't want to let that happen again. They don't want the likes of Leicester City coming in and having their glamour romance story and ruining it for everyone. The clubs in Italy don't want Atalanta to come from nowhere and be the most attractive football team in Italy and their argument will always be, so if you take Juventus and Milan to, I don't know, China in pre-season or something, or you take Juventus and Atalanta, which one's going to get the most viewing? And unfortunately, the answer probably is Juventus and AC Milan. But any side that deserves to do something on merit by winning football matches earns the right to play in the competition. The idea of having not just the European Super League as 1 is awful, but 2, then to close the majority of teams in it is like, who wants that?
Mm.
I don't know. I wouldn't want my team in it. I
Yeah,
don't think.
I
I'd
understand.
rather stay behind and try and win a weakened Premier League.
Well, good news for you is that you wouldn't be in it.
I've got some bad news for you. We would be in it.
I don't think so. Well, here's another question for you. So I put together a 20-team league, which we're going to look at in a minute. I've got 14 maybes as well. You've got a few less maybes. Part of the reason I probably got more maybes than you was I was also looking at an even spread, which, like you mentioned, with Bundesliga, Premier League, La Liga, and La Liga, and the Italian league, you get 4 teams from each Champions League. Here, I don't think there's an argument to say that each of those 4 big leagues should have the same number of clubs in this European Super League.
Great.
Did you spread it equally or did you not?
No, I wanted to. So I started with picking 3 clubs from England, Italy,
Germany
and
Spain.
Spain. And I didn't actually have 3 Germans to start with. I added a third because I thought, and I'll explain why. And then I've ended up with a few more from these as well, because one of the things Adam had suggested to us with his idea was look at it partly historical, look at it partly geographical. But what I did was take it upon, if this actually came into force, who would actually be in it? I thought that was the best way to answer the question is which 20 teams would most likely make it up. And that doesn't account necessarily, it does in some cases account for historical. It doesn't account for geographical. It would be made up of the 5 big leagues plus a couple of others, in my opinion. The Spiegel, our old friends.
Who have you got as the 5th big league?
France.
Okay.
The Spiegel, our old friends who had the leaks on Manchester City, they reckoned that they had information of secret talks back in 2018, which included 5 of the current Premier League clubs, investigating the idea of a Super League to start in 2021. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen. But I think it was enough to make UEFA have looked at trying to rebrand the Champions League. I've said to you that I think when the next TV contract comes up for the Champions League, I think you'll find it's going to go back to 2 groups, mate, and perhaps a quarterfinals, semi-finals, final, which was a format we had in the very early noughties. They reckoned that the original idea was to have a Super League of just 16 teams. And there were 11 clubs, 11 founder clubs who would go into it and they would never get relegated. They were Manchester United, Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester City, Arsenal. So 5 from England. Real Madrid, Barca, Bayern Munich, Juventus and AC Milan, and Paris Saint-Germain. And the suggestion was that the other 5 spots would be offered on invitation. So not even relegation, would be offered on invitation, and that may change by year. And the suggestion was that those first 5 would be Atletico Madrid, Borussia Dortmund, Inter Milan, Roma, and Marseille.
Okay, interesting.
And so therefore, the majority of these teams makes up what my idea would be for a 20-team Super League. And you'll see there, even in that, there is an English bias. 5 from England out of 16.
Yeah, I had 4, and I would add a 5th as well. I had 5, to be fair, with my 20. Let's do this. I'm going to read out some names, and you're going to confirm this is my 20. You're going to tell me if they're in your 20 as well. And if they are, then we know that pretty much we're convinced that they're in.
Okay.
PSG.
Yeah.
I'm going to go from definite to least definite. Yeah.
You're PSG first. Yeah.
Well, I went France. There's only 1 team from France.
I think
was like definite.
You'd be in a position with PSG where if this was to happen, they would be at the front of pushing for it to happen.
Yeah. Barcelona.
Of course.
Real Madrid.
Of course.
Atletico Madrid.
Yes.
Juventus.
Yes.
Inter.
Yes.
AC.
Yes.
Man United.
Yes.
Liverpool.
Yes.
City.
Yes.
Munich.
Yes.
Dortmund.
Yes.
Now we're getting a little bit more tricky. Ajax.
I would have Ajax in, yeah.
I would have Ajax in. Okay. Porto.
No.
Sporting Lisbon.
No.
So Portugal out.
No. I would have Benfica in.
Okay. Then Chelsea.
Yeah.
I've got Chelsea in. The last three, I think we can debate out because you're right. Schalke 04 maybe go in or what have you. I've got Valencia.
No.
Marseille.
No.
PSV.
No.
West Ham United. I put them as a 20th team just to see what your reaction would be.
I took the
okay, I'll take them out. Shall I take West Ham out?
Stop it. West Ham are not going in there, man.
Okay, fine. I'll take them out of my 20. So you don't think any of those?
I think it would depend. What I've looked at it from is although England, France, Italy, Spain have 4 direct Champions League places, I think in the case of possibly in Germany, I don't think there'd be enough demand for those 4 teams, actually. I think the guaranteed of 4 spots in Germany is more for Bayern and also Dortmund, more than perhaps, because they change a lot, whether it's like Schalke, Mönchengladbach, Wolfsburg have spells, Bayer Leverkusen.
Hamburg, back in the day.
Yeah. There's been more rotation there in terms of who takes up those spots than, say, obviously Atalanta in Italy is a really unusual one to push in from outside the elite. And actually below Barca, Madrid and Atletico, I would agree that, say, Valencia is probably the biggest. But then Seville have had some good spells. Seville have won 5 Europa Leagues this century. It's a monster achievement. But then they've never. They would never go anywhere close to winning the Champions League, and they wouldn't. They if they went into this league, they'd be right near the bottom of it. That would be my opinion. So I think when you take in the factors of money, I would put all of the English top 6 in there. I think that would be the demand. Once you start going down to the names like you said, and I don't really argue with the ones you said, once you get down to sort of teams 18, 19, 20, none of them are on a financial footing that could come anywhere close to Tottenham and Arsenal.
Correct.
And the reason I say that is because
Arsenal was very difficult to leave out. I think Arsenal have to be in.
The reason I'd say that is I think the other 5, except for Tottenham, would have to go in because they're part of the original talks.
Yeah.
So they would go in. If it was restricted to 4, my honest per nation, my honest thoughts is that at the moment Arsenal would be the ones that would miss out. Yeah, financially, there's no way City and United would miss out. Liverpool, competitive-wise, would have to be in there at the moment and historical of their Champions League achievements, etc. And also, to be honest with you, what Chelsea have done in Europe over the last 20 years or so, they've won 3 European trophies in the last 10 years. Yep. They're, on merit-wise, likely to be the ones that finish 4th this year. So actually, at the moment, if it was just one of the London clubs, for example, I think it probably would be Chelsea first, then Arsenal, then Tottenham. But I think all of them would go in because of the financial demand. Can you imagine Daniel Levy wanting to miss out on this? I mean, it's frightening. But and he would get in. There's no way some of the teams that I'd leave out here, for example, like your Portos and your PSVs, like financially, they can't offer what clubs like Tottenham can. And you might even end up that we'd have this conversation in 10 years and we'd go, it would be 8. And you'd have Newcastle in as well, or West Ham, or Everton, or Wolves, depending on, like, Wolves, I think, would, like, 25th on the Deloitte money list, I think. It's just gone. I think fucking League One, like, 3 years ago.
I mean, if you look at Wikipedia in terms of the biggest clubs in Europe, I don't know how or why West Ham are consistently 15th to 18th, give or take, in the last 5 years. Everton, a couple of places below. Newcastle, a couple of places below. I don't know how that doesn't translate onto the pitch, but still, I don't argue with that. I was looking to spread the geography a little bit more. Arsenal were very difficult to leave out. Tottenham, just the lack of trophies goes against you guys a little bit. So I can understand that. Talk to me about Portugal. I don't think there's a lot. Benfica, Porto, there's not a lot between the 3 of them in terms of history and trophies.
It's worth saying Tottenham have got a very recent Champions League final, which many of these clubs on this list have never even been in one.
No, true.
Make this 20. So I don't know. There'll be some sort of merit.
Champions League final without winning a knockout game?
We're talking about, blood. So we didn't win 3-2 in Ajax. We didn't beat Man City at home.
Time.
Or we didn't beat Dortmund home and away. Yeah, we knocked out 3 other teams who would be in this league.
What was the stat you told me? You got to the Champions League final without winning over 2 legs. Is that right?
No, we beat Dortmund home and away. I think we ended up losing only one less than we won. I think was the
Okay.
stat, something like
Oh,
that.
right. Okay. So there was a funny quirk.
But then
anyway,
Liverpool lost way more Champions League games en route to winning it than they lost in the Premier League last year. So
yeah, they're all quirks. Let's be honest.
I would put the 6 English clubs in. I would put the 3 Spanish clubs in. They would have to go in. I think leaving out Valencia's touch and go, but I think like financially, they've been trying to build a new stadium for like 10 plus years and it's held up. I don't think they're in a financial position to be pushing anything. They seem to be in competition with your likes of Seville, Getafe, Sociedad, Bilbao over and over again for kind of that 4th spot. So I don't think they would be. They haven't ever won the Champions League either. Obviously, had the 2 consecutive finals in the early noughties. But I don't know if, I think there's others from historic and current would merit the place more than them, actually.
Yep.
So it would be the 3 Spanish teams. I'd go 4 from Italy. I would go Juventus and Inter Milan, definitely.
Sure.
I think Roma on size of football club, and they're actually in a really strong position financially if you look at the money list, etc. They were Champions League semi-finalists only 2 years ago. I think they would probably be worth of merit. If you actually look at what your Juventus president said, if you take the quotes into more context, he compares Atalanta and Roma, saying like Roma was semi-finalists last year, didn't do enough and have missed out. That was the context he was using it in. And AC Milan would go in, but on no sporting merit whatsoever.
None.
It would be on historical, and it would be on the fact that when these talks, if they happened 2 years ago, they were at the front of it. And I don't think there's any club pushing for this harder than them.
Yeah, no doubt.
They've finished inside the top 4, I think, once in Serie A in the last 10 years. They've won, I think it's 2 Scudettos this century. That they're miles off from the team that we walked into when we started watching Gazzetta in the early 90s, unbeaten
the
and all that.
and Maldinis.
Of course, and the front men, Van Basten, Gullit, Rijkaard and all that, mate.
Yeah.
So they're miles away from that team. And, they're on a minus goal difference in Serie A at the moment. I think they've scored 28 goals in 26 league games. Like, they're nothing now.
No.
But look at them 10 years ago. They're winning the Champions League in 2007 with some incredible players, the Pirlos, Seedorfs, etc.
Yeah, and you look at the marketing side, the red and black stripes. If you see a red and black stripe kit, the first team that comes to mind
is Bournemouth.
Without a doubt, if only, is AC Milan. There are a bunch of clubs in Italy that are probably similar to your Everton, West Ham, Newcastles of the world in terms of maybe Napoli or Lazio, but just not quite there. And the thing is, with the way the Italian league is and probably the Italian economy, you don't see them becoming real powerhouses. Like the English mid-tier clubs are going to push more than the Italian mid-level clubs are definitely going to push.
Yeah, Napoli on, say, the last decade is just about the hardest team to leave out because they've been very good, particularly over the last 5 years. But there isn't the historical to back it up. And actually, they've had a not a great season this year. So it feels like they got close to Juventus, but a little bit like Spurs couldn't push. But then when you compare the financials of Tottenham and Napoli, it's miles away from each other.
Chalk and cheese, yeah, completely.
So I think Napoli would be unfortunate ones to miss out to Milan. As much as we're saying, last 20 years not been up to that much. It's only Real Madrid's won more Champions Leagues than them, right? So the history is there. It's them, the Italian clubs, I'm convinced, that want the closed shop as well to protect them so that they go in and they stay in. Milan can't get back to the top of Serie A at the moment. So they're miles off thinking they're going to be back in the Champions League. So I'd go to 4 clubs from Italy to add to the 6 in England and 3 in Spain. And therefore, that's why I've added 3 from Germany.
Who was your third club from Germany then?
I went with Schalke, which is controversial because, again, they're another one who's not done a huge deal. They've had a couple of Champions League semi-finals. Very well supported club. Got a bit of a rivalry with Dortmund, actually. I feel like financially they'd be the one to go in. The reason I say that is if England, Italy and Spain had at least 3 spots each, you could bet your life that Germany would be crying for the same. And I just think following Bayern, Dortmund, Schalke are the ones with the most power, the biggest average gates, and the most recent European success. And that's why I think if it came to it, they would be the third club.
Yeah, if you look at lists of biggest clubs in Germany, Schalke and Bremen are the two that tie for third spot on most lists. So yeah,
Bremen have been miles. I think they went down to the second division. I think
this is more size of club as opposed to necessarily success. But Schalke have had the success. So if you're going to pick one of the two, Schalke's the one without a doubt.
Yeah, I think everything's there place-wise. That you had the 2004 final there, the Champions League final when Porto beat Monaco. They've got the support. It's just worth saying that obviously the Bundesliga is still the best supported league. Average attendances of over 40,000 across the league, which is bumped up by your Munich's, Dortmund's, but no different to say Old Trafford and the others boost up the Premier League as well, right? So there's amazing support out there. So that's the sort of one that could be interchangeable. I just think if it got thrown together tomorrow, I think Schalke would be in.
It leaves you 3 spots, James, which I'm assuming you're going to give 2 to French clubs.
Yeah, I'll give a second French. I'll give it to Lyon over Marseille, which I think was...
Yeah, Lyon, Monaco and Marseille are the 3 that you've got to pick.
It was probably the toughest one to call. Because size of club, you might argue Marseille are actually a little bit bigger. The Velodrome is an awesome site. They obviously have won the European Cup before in 1993, although there's plenty of illegal stuff behind the backwater of that story. But I think Lyon have been the better football club, certainly in this century. They had a sustained period of success in the noughties where they were winning Ligue 1 basically every year till PSG came back into the money and were regularly sort of quarter-finalists, semi-finalists in Champions League. They've obviously moved into a new stadium very recently. I think right now, although they're not having the best season in Ligue 1, I think Marseille are above them actually. I think combining the recent and the slightly longer over the last 20 years or so, and financially as well, that Lyon would go in ahead of Marseille.
And who's your last spot, James?
So Ajax and Benfica would be the 2 clubs that I'd put in from outside the so-called Big 5 leagues. I think Ajax have obviously put themselves in a much stronger position following the Champions League run last season. You've got all the history with them in terms of that team in the 90s, the team in the 70s. They're the biggest club in Holland. And I think similarly, that's why I'd go for Benfica over Porto. Difficult choice because, again, you'd probably argue Porto have been better this year. This century. Between them, they've both won 2 European Cups in their history. I think the Benfica side of the 60s and 70s is more historic. Got to a final again against Milan in the late 80s. Might even been 1990, actually. But I think the killer for me on this one was that Benfica are a far better supported football club than Porto.
Yep.
Average attendances at Benfica are up on Porto about 15,000 or so. They're by far the best supported club in Portugal. And that's why when I evaluated the 2 of them, if one was to go in and be a power in this league, Benfica, I think, would have a chance of sustainability possibly, whereas I think Porto would just prop it up at the moment.
It helps, the Benfica being in Lisbon, Porto being in Porto, helps. Like being a capital city football club always helps. Bigger population, bigger fan base. Easier, I'd say relatively, it's not that much easier, but probably easier to get to for away fans and what have you. So I can't argue with that. I just think Sporting, Benfica, Porto, much of a muchness. Again, very similar to the mid-tier English clubs.
It's not always the case, though, that we look at that. If you take major cities like Berlin, Rome, we haven't spoken about Lazio, for example. We speak a lot more about some of the other northern clubs. Obviously, to be honest, the 2 biggest clubs in our country are northern clubs, mate. They're not London clubs.
Oh, yeah, true.
Man United.
But it's where it's an A-B choice between Benfica and Porto. It plays in Benfica's advantage for sure.
Yeah, Benfica have far bigger support than Porto. Just want to cover off some clubs who obviously didn't put in. So
I'm missing one of your teams, mate. Here,
who have you got?
PSG, Barca, Real, Atletico, Benfica, Arsenal, Juve, Inter, AC, United, Liverpool, City, Chelsea, Munich and Dortmund, Ajax and Schalke, Tottenham and Lyon.
Right, can I just do it the easy way? Because you're not reading it you're not reading it in the same order as me,
I
are
had
you?
to swap out
There are
your ones.
there are
Go on.
six clubs from England,
Got them.
4 clubs from Italy,
Juve,
AC, Inter, Juventus,
see,
and Roma.
Roma is the missing link.
3 teams from Spain, 3 teams from Germany, 2 from France, Ajax and Benfica.
Correct.
We've mentioned Marseille, Napoli, Seville, and Valencia a bit. Porto, we've mentioned. I'd put PSV and Feyenoord into the conversation because they're actually
Decent
very
clubs.
well supported Dutch clubs. Both also have a history of doing well in Europe, not so much the last 10 years or so, but have both done very well in the past. So I think they would warrant the conversation, but I don't see where I'd put them in.
Nah.
And what would justify 2 Dutch clubs at the moment. Celtic have to come into the conversation. I know there's going to be some people listening to this going, what about us? And yes, on size of football club, Glasgow Celtic, eventually, if they got in and had the money, same as I always say with the Premier League, yes, could potentially do something. But to put them in this now, nah, they wouldn't be in the top 100 best teams in Europe, mate.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree with you more on that.
So there's no way they could go in. After time, they don't even get through the qualifiers and that, losing to Slovenian teams and the like. So at the moment, they couldn't. They would put it this way: there would be no want from the other teams to have Celtic in there.
Yeah, I mean, there's no.
That's part of the thing.
Pull either, right? Outside of Scotland, they don't really have the same pull as some of these other clubs do in the Far East or what have you.
Yeah, and just to mention a few sides from going east, I obviously looked around other countries. So you got people, Steaua Bucharest have won it.
Yeah.
I looked at Greece, Turkey. There was a spell sort of 5-10 years ago where it looked like the Turkish clubs were going to come into money, and it didn't really happen. Same with the Russian clubs, and none of them have ever done anything in Europe, really.
No.
You could possibly make a case historically on actually Panathinaikos over Olympiakos, but I just couldn't justify it. The ones that did consider Eastern Europe would be, obviously, Shakhtar Donetsk have done quite well this century.
Yep.
So too Zenit St. Petersburg, who I think if you were to go from Russia, you would say they're the biggest ones. Like, they've got the Champions League final themselves in 2022, I think.
And geographically, they're the right side of Russia as well to be able to get in and out relatively easily.
Yeah, big place. And the other one to mention, a historic name, is obviously Dynamo Kiev, who from further back, much further, kind of so often was made up before it broke away as a lot of the Soviet Union team. And then obviously in the late 90s, we remember like Shevchenko, Rebrov and the likes. They were in, I think, a couple of semi-finals. But those outsider couldn't justify putting in. I think the hardest to leave out would probably Marseille, Napoli, Valencia.
It's with all of these other additional teams and countries, you're looking for them rather than them jumping to you as a very obvious put me in, and you're trying to be politically correct and give people, every country, a little bit of a shout where their greatest team is. They're not in the league of the top.
No, I mean, if you went to say Scandinavia, Copenhagen, Rosenborg, you're not putting them in this. I don't mean that disrespectfully or anything.
Gothenburg, maybe, from back in the day.
You're not. Yeah, probably. Actually, you're quite right in terms of historically. I think it's AIK are the ones that with the big stadium and that now, isn't it? So you wouldn't go near these teams to put them in this.
No. There we go.
And the other one we haven't mentioned, Belgium, probably Anderlecht's worth a mention for historicals as well. But again, nowhere near it with Vincent Kompany at the moment. We're about 7th in Belgium, I think.
Right. Very difficult. Very difficult. I can't argue with you, James. I think there was 4 or 5 in there that were ifs and buts. Toss a coin, and I couldn't argue with the selection. I do think that having 6 English clubs, Tottenham, if it was called today, I think Tottenham would miss out to one of the other clubs on that list. But it's very difficult, and I think it's a situation where money talks. Definitely money talks.
That's why I think Tottenham and Arsenal would be in. It's because money would talk. I think if this comes back around in 10 years from now, you might find, like I said, we're talking about 8 English teams being in it.
Yeah, potentially.
Hopefully, this never comes about. It's the worst thing imaginable. One suggestion is that this would happen, perhaps to a lesser extent, maybe 16 teams, as was mentioned, and run as a weekend tournament against the Champions League still continuing in, say, midweek. And then maybe even these clubs fielding B teams in their domestic leagues. It makes you sick in the back of your mouth, mate.
It's not the game we follow.
If you wanna fuck off, fuck off.
Agreed.
I certainly would hope that if ever came about that my club didn't want to be a part of it. And I think we're probably holding on to German and English clubs saying, we don't need this. Thank you very much. You lot crack on. Because the Italian and the French, I think particularly, and the big two in Spain wouldn't be against it. They're for doing it.
We shall see. I'll be fascinated with the tweets and comments that come out from people thinking, do they agree or do you disagree with the teams that have been put in there? If you've got any reason why you would disagree and put another club in, by all means, stick it out there, because I think it's going to be...
I better mention, I haven't spoken about Celtic. I better talk about Rangers and I get killed otherwise. Yeah, them as well. And Aberdeen, Arts, Hibernian. Yeah.
Oh, James.
Next year.
We'll see. So interesting conversation, James. Why don't we tell everybody what else we've got left this week? We've got some good content coming up.
Yes, quiz tomorrow on World Cup 2018. I think I'm going to struggle to make this quite difficult, so I think it's one you can probably all join in with.
Yeah, it'll be a bit of fun then.
Stream Wednesday night, Champ Man, obviously. Thursday, we're going to talk about Alan Sugar's reign in charge of Tottenham, including the court case with Venables and how Tottenham fell behind as a football club because he wouldn't open his wallet, basically. Then stream Friday, Champ Man again Saturday. Back with you Monday, Princess.
There we go. And what are we doing on the 23rd of May?
We're doing a 24-hour live stream, apparently.
Yeah. Still got to get some...
Which I tweeted out last night, and I'm now like, shit, I haven't got enough room for all the guests that want to come.
I told you. I did say, like, half an hour. If you get 20 people, half an hour, 40 minutes each, before you know it, the time is gone. But we will figure it out as we always do. So do stay tuned. If you follow James on Twitter at Planet FPL Pod, you can follow me on Twitter at Suj James. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you're getting it, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We're on them all. And also the YouTube channel where all the videos go up and where the live stream magic happens as well, which you just hit the notification bell and you'll be alerted as soon as we go live. Other than that, please do stay safe. I know the weather's turned a little bit nasty. It has down here in London. So I hope it helps you stay indoors. Get cozy for the next week because it's going to rain for a week. Listen to us and we'll be back at you. Ciao for now.
Be nice to each other. Cue music, man, child.